We're recording. I was about to say good morning, but it's actually good afternoon. It's 12:30.
All right.
And Joan was asking me what I was eating for lunch, and I was eating granola and yogurt, and she said it sounds like breakfast, and I said actually it is my breakfast, because quarantine's got me all mixed up. I hope this Zoom finds you all as well as can be. I'm going to give myself a shout out. Joan, I don't think I showed you. Be good to people. It's my new sweatshirt.
All right. That's wonderful.
I've tried to control online shopping during quarantine, but I did find this and ordered it and just got it in the mail yesterday.
Reminds me a little bit of Ellen DeGeneres's Be Nice.
That's true. Although, have you seen on Twitter, there's all these stories going around that she's not actually nice.
Oh, really?
Which I can't, I'm finding that hard in my heart to believe, so.
Well,
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Let me guess, are you wearing an FA sweatshirt?
I'm wearing an FA sweatshirt.
There we go. Hold it up more. Got to see the logo. There it is. Very nice. So this class is pretty much the last class we'll be doing any substantial content for. Our plan for next week is to give you the time that would have been in class to work on your final paper, which will be due Friday, May 8th. I just got an email from one of the students that she was working on submitting her final paper, which is impressive. And she's doing it as an individual, and it's still locked in on Canvas as a group paper. So I will disable whatever I need to disable on Canvas to ensure that it just accounts for individual points for people that are turning it in as an individual, and then we will assign likely the same grade for everybody.
So Mary, how will that affect people that are making up their own groups?
So we'll just do the same. We'll just grade everybody individually for the group paper. They'll all get the same score.
But how will we know who's in the group? Does
They've
every person have to submit an individual paper?
Yes, that would be the most effective way to do it. Good point, Joan. So those of you that are in groups have let us know what those groups are. For ease purposes, even if you're in a group, please all individually submit your group paper in the spot in Canvas where you could submit the assignment. That makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll just grade accordingly. So for next week, we plan to just maybe have a discussion thread about the policy alternatives you guys are deciding to move on, and skip doing any type of Zoom. But this week, I thought who better to interview and have a conversation with than Joan Riebel. When we started way back in, what was it, January, when we first got together, I said she's the grandma of child welfare in Minnesota, and I think it benefits all of us to hear from her, especially in a time like now. When I said to Joan, let's talk about what's next. We're at this major crossroads in the history of our country and the history of our world. And Joan's response to me was, well, I don't know what's next. Do you? And I thought, I don't know either, but I really want to hear your perspective. And there's few perspectives I value in the world more than Joan's. And one thing she kept saying to me yesterday when we were prepping for class was, I want to do something that's meaningful for students. I don't want to just, have an assignment to have an assignment, or post-class content to post-class content. We actually want to have a discussion that's thoughtful and perhaps impactful for all of you. Joan, anything you want to say based on my little intro there?
No, I agree, Mary. We do want our conversation to have some meaning for students, and that's a tough one at this point. I was thinking after our conversation yesterday that visioning looking to the future and trying to plan for the future has always been one of my favorite uh,
Hmm.
activities. I love to vision. I love to think about what might be, what could be, all of that. And right now, I feel really challenged by the visioning because there's so many unknowns. We just don't know where this is going to end.
Hmm.
What we do know is that there's a lot of people unemployed. There's a lot of families that are in trouble. There's a lot of students that aren't getting their needs met in the schools. So there's a lot of people that are food insecure, housing insecure. So it's a real critical time, I think, in our history to really sit back and look at where do we go from here?
Right.
What do we do with all of this? And that always brings me back to previous times after World War or after the Great Depression. And this morning I was even thinking after the Civil War,
Hmm.
when we had so many people that were killing each other in the war, um, not everything turned out well after that because we still didn't have the sense that we're in this together.
Hmm.
One of the themes that's really coming out of this, especially in the media as I read it, is we are in this together, and
Hmm.
people are recognizing the incredible need that we have to be um, cognizant of the need that everybody has during this time. So,
So speaking of needs, we and you talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we've had discussions philosophically around like who needs what depends, and who is deciding what people need and how they're going to get it is often, the people in power are deciding what people need, and then they're determining the mode in which they get that need met. As the stimulus package, the care package for an example, as an example. Um, Given that it's a child welfare policy class, and we've covered lots of different policies over the years, what struck you, when you were born in what, 40?
42.
So you were just after, were you born into the Great Depression?
No, I was born after the Great
When
Depression.
did the
During
Great Depression end?
Great Depression ended right at about 38, 39.
Okay. Not a great historical mind, but I knew it was right around in there.
Mhm.
So so talk to us a bit about the policies, in your studies, and how you understand the country's response to the World War II and the Great Depression. What were policies that you saw enacted that were successful?
Well, I think the biggest one is the Social Security Act, which was originally designed for widows and children. Lots of people um, didn't make it during the Great Depression. Lots of men died in World War II. So the government was worried about moms weren't working back then,
Right.
Moms were staying home raising their kids. Maybe on the farm they were working, but generally not productive members. So the Social Security Act, certainly very significant. And then after World War II, they had the um, veterans, what was it, that the veterans bill, the education bill,
Mm.
where the vets could all go to college off of the GI Bill, that's what it was called. And that made a huge impact. I mean, that all of that happened pretty much during the 50s. A lot of people from World War II and the Korean War, a lot of those men got educated and went to college because of the GI Bill.
Hmm.
That was all seeing into the future, seeing that people were going to need more education to deal with more complex society and
Hmm.
economic needs. Um, so those social programs were significant in terms of moving us forward. But as all social workers know, I think, those of us working in the margins, working with marginalized people, we know that there's a lot of people that haven't really gotten the benefit of some of these programs.
Hmm.
Um, I'm on Medicare, so I have some of the best medical today
Right.
that I've ever had with Medicare, and I pay for a supplement, but Medicare pays my base medical. But we have lots and lots of kids that don't have medical.
Right.
Um, so, what do we do with that? And I think the whole healthcare issue is really coming to the fore with this
Right.
virus and how much people need healthcare, but at the same time, um, basic needs in healthcare aren't necessarily getting met during this time. So it really
Right.
points out the complexity of it. I have a friend who's a doctor at Children's in St. Paul, and one of the children's hospitals is going to shut down,
Just
either
entirely.
St. Paul temporarily at least, because they're not very busy
Right.
because they're dealing with the coronavirus. So the worry for this doctor, that's my friend, is that there's kids out there that aren't getting basic needs met because nobody wants to go to the hospital.
Right.
How do we make sure that people are getting their basic needs met? How do we make sure that they're getting, pay for them, insurance, whatever? Those are all really complex kind of issues, I think, that we haven't resolved yet.
Right. We're just, I mean, just from a foster care lens, there's DHS, with, the permission of Governor Walz, basically granting DHS the ability to make ongoing waivers and modifications to services, given the pandemic. Foster care, you're required to have a physical exam within 30 days of placement, and then annual exams, moving forward, in addition to being up, having updated vaccines. Your kids can't even, you can't go to the doctor in any capacity right now to get shots, some really fundamentally important, to your point, healthcare needs that right now are just basically put on pause. And we've been given permission to just not even attempt to access getting a kid a physical because you're not going to be able to get one. And how that's a public health concern,
Mhm.
as well as the economic impact of people that work in those
Exactly.
healthcare facilities.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, as we are like living in like this, I mean, I just find it ironic that that I've stumbled into this teaching of, child welfare public policy class. And in the last month, I've been involved in, really significant policy and program changes as a result of the pandemic, and
Mhm.
how quickly you have to adapt on the fly,
Mhm.
uh, and how much is involved.
Yeah, and that raises another policy issue, which is when do those policies go back to whatever it is they should?
Exactly.
And and the example of a kid needing to have a physical within 30 days of placement in foster care, is that ever going to change back again so
Right.
that kids still need to get that met? And those are all policy questions um, that come up during emergency kind of situations.
Hmm.
And then do they go back in their normal or routine kind of way? And that remains to be seen, I think.
Right, because therein lies an opportunity too. I
Mhm.
mean, not as, um, an opportunity. I was going to say, um, child welfare checkups are important, but you're looking at possibly more substantial policy changes having the opportunity to be changed because we are in this shift right now. Background studies, for example, um, are, you can't access $40 um, if you don't have providers that have cleared federally approved background studies. And right now, people can't go get their fingerprints. So in order for that requirement to be waived at a federal level, we had basically had to wait for, presidential approval. But then on the state level, you're going to have across the country different people are going to be in different designated, like, right now we're in a peacetime emergency, and all of the modifications to existing policies are in effect until the peacetime emergency ends, which is the middle of May, which will likely be extended. But you just have that rub of the different, like the federal legislation versus the state legislation, and really no clear, like, universal, like, when you say we're in this together, like, I feel that way, like, emotionally, in terms of like the citizens, but in terms of the federal and state uh, response, that's where it's felt really challenging, because you have different states that are going to be going in different directions with some really unclear guidance from the federal branch of things.
That brings me back to an earlier time. Minnesota had child protection laws, mandated reporting laws, before there was a federal law.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, so the states that wanted to could have mandated reporting. And there were a lot of states that said the family is the most important unit and the government should not get involved in the family's business. But then other states said, but every kid has the right to have a safe home and be safe. So there was a conflict around that. And then in the late 60s, the feds made it a national policy that you had to report across the country. But even then, different states have different standards.
Right.
So
And
we know that, kids can be found not abused in one state and
right.
abused in another.
So speaking of state by state, response to the pandemic as it relates to child protection issues, one of the articles we posted was about basically the widespread online school absences that have been really concerning. As you guys know, I've talked about my wife who's a school social worker for St. Paul Public Schools, and their school alone, they had like 1 week, 75% of one grade didn't participate in anything, like nothing, no contact in any capacity. And there's been attempts made to contact families, contact the kids. And right now they're at this crossroads of needing to, report that information out. And I know various county child protection systems are trying to avoid responding how they typically would, like a truancy court would potentially be opened. But given the incredibly unusual circumstances we're in, they don't want to jump there, because that's often a door that opens to more significant child protection issues. And so I'm curious, Joan, this is all evolving at a rapid pace. We all do ourselves a favor by continuing to take it a day at a time. But in the spirit of being visionary, and the fact that we probably won't be going back to school this school year, what are your thoughts on how this can be, I don't want to use the word managed, but what should we do?
That's a good question, Mary. I'm not sure what we should do. I was really blown away by 21% of the students in the Minneapolis public schools are absent.
Yep.
21%. So those kids are not getting schooling right now. And, my immediate response is maybe they'll have to repeat a school year or something, but that's not easy to do either.
Right.
it's a tough one. In St. Paul, the article said that 17% of the
Yeah.
in kindergarten to second grade didn't respond. And I think about a kid that's kindergarten to grade being schooled on a computer or an iPad, and it's kind of a daunting task, I think.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure, what the answer is going to be. It's going to be a lot of catch up for sure.
Well, and what we talked about yesterday when we were prepping is, and it reminded me of some of the conversations we've had around lack of childcare for many of our, parents who work in in jobs that are today deemed essential. So you work at a grocery store, you work at a convenience store, um, you work in what many consider more, lower, well, not consider the lower income professions. They're working,
Mhm. And
and
they have to.
they have to. I mean, those those are our frontline workers right now, in addition to the healthcare professionals. And so you're looking at potentially there being ramifications of not ensuring your child logs on to Seesaw, for example, because dad had to go to work because he doesn't have an option. Because if you don't go to work and you deny employment opportunity, you can't file for unemployment. I mean, so you have all of these scenarios where, similar to, you know families that are working child protection cases who can't access childcare, and then they are there's punitive effects, right, to not being able to care for your children during the day, even though they have to go to freaking work and can't afford childcare.
Yeah,
So you just see the same thing happening again.
my son and I had a conversation. He's a stay-at-home dad,
Mhm.
and his wife is a lawyer, so they have a really solid income. And he was saying he thought every family should have a stay-at-home parent.
Ha.
Well, that's nice in theory,
Mhm.
but I think it's pretty close to 30% of our families are single-parent families.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of the other families need two-parent
Two.
incomes in order
Right.
to survive and, pay all their bills. So it brings me back to that article by David Brooks.
Oh, is
Uh,
this the one,
he's,
the
yeah, and that's on Canvas. So
nuclear family?
yeah, if anybody wants to go back and review that,
It's Joan's favorite shit from the semester.
it's the nuclear family isn't working. And there was another article fairly recently that said the same thing.
Right.
Uh, the nuclear family just isn't working anymore because in that scenario, we assume that families take care of themselves and families meet all their own needs.
Right.
Well, those of us that are in supportive family networks, like I have two sons and friends that support me. I
Right.
mean, the reason my son was here the other day is he brought me some propane for my grill, so I didn't have to go out and get the propane. That's just a simple little example of
Right.
uh, extended family networks can do. But there's a lot of families that don't have that,
Right.
to rely on themselves. And in the whole child protection realm, I think we tend to reinforce that. We
Yeah.
think that parents are the ones that are responsible for their kids. They're the ones that have to meet the kids' needs, and if they don't, they can be charged with neglect or.
Right. Well, and to your point, it's the lens, if you're using the lens of the nuclear family, which is how policies are, that's the lens that's used when creating, policy responses. Um, and if that's not, what's working, and if it's not actually a reflection of the reality of today's families, it's not a one size fits all, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's really, and Joan and I have had conversations about, in general, like, what do people need, and why are only those that are in power tasked with determining what that need is. And Joan has a great story about her years. What were you, in your 20s working at Ramsey County
Right.
around a program about work and training. And so Joan can give you some context, but essentially it had been decided that, you know, we needed to train people how to work. And Joan, take it away.
Yeah, the mantra, and I think it still is,
Mhm.
is if you can work, you should be out working,
Yep.
supporting your family and bringing in the resources you need for your family. If you're not working, you can, you know, if you want to get aid from the government to support your family, you have to. I mean, they recently talked about making people work for food stamps and
Yep.
making people work in order to get Medicare,
Yep.
Medicaid. So anyway, back in the day with the AFTC laws, they,
And this was what, 50 years ago?
yeah.
Yeah.
50
So remind people, AFDC was we've talked about it, I was
Form-
blank on what it stands for.
yeah, aid to families with dependent
That's
children.
what, yeah.
And that really came out of the Social Security laws.
Yeah.
And now it's been changed to TANF.
Right.
And TANF, it's a good example because TANF added a work component to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But back in the day, 50 years ago, when we had a brand new federal program called Work and Training, and it was designed to train women who were on public assistance to work so that they wouldn't have to be on public assistance. And back in those days, we
Oh,
had
dang, is it your mom or grandmother's clock?
my mom's.
Your mom's clock. Everyone, I can't remember if we mentioned this last time, but her clock chimes every 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It gets super excited right on the hour. And Joan has maintained that clock meticulously over the years. Okay, sorry, work and training.
So they designed a federal program called Work and Training, and it was the other sidebar of this, Mary, is that back in those days, if you had any need for any kind of public assistance, you automatically had a social worker. So
Mm-hmm.
aids and services were combined. So I was
Got it.
helping to administer AFTC at the same time as I was child protection worker.
Got it.
It was all wrapped into one.
Okay.
So I had a woman on my caseload who had two preschool kids, little kids, and she was living in an apartment, single mom, living in an apartment, and she was prostituting on the weekends. I was in my 20s, thinking righteously that she shouldn't be living that kind of a lifestyle with two kids. So I bundled up a package of program information for the work and training program and went out there to talk to her about going back to school and getting a real job through this work and training program. So I was explaining it to her, and she looked at me and she said, "Weeble, you really are a dumb son of a bitch." And I was taken aback, of course, and she said, "I can make enough money on the weekends, working 2 days, to support my kids and then have them with me all week long while they're with their grandparents on the weekend when I'm working. And you want me to go to school to become a secretary where I sit in a desk all week long with my kids in daycare and only am with them on the weekends and not even earn as much money as I'm earning now." So it really brought to mind the importance for all of us to listen to everybody's voice, listen to what people are saying they need, and try to respond in a way that that fulfills that
Right.
need. When you were saying earlier that people in positions of power, people in authority, I mean, we've got white men in suits sitting in Congress and in the Senate making decisions about what families need, and not really listening. I mean, right now we've got people coming to the forefront as heroes
Right.
that 6 months ago we didn't even really acknowledge existed.
Right. We thought, yeah, I mean, you think about grocers and convenience stores and, people that work at factories and
The,
as,
the garbage haulers and
yep.
the recycle haulers. I mean, we had a recycle picked up early this morning.
hmm
Um, all of those people that we're now saying are heroes because they're going out and keeping what part of the economy going that we can.
Right.
Um,
And will
me,
we use this opportunity to lift them up differently moving forward?
right, and listen to them
Right.
and keep in their perspective so that everybody participates in what will sustain us,
hmm
what will make us stronger,
hmm
what will bring us forward. What is it that we need to do
hmm
to really meet the need of everybody in our society? And that brings us back to fundamental issues of equality and and fairness.
Right. Well, I think for me, I'm, gosh, 8 years removed from grad school, and I don't miss it because it was a lot of paper writing. And sometimes you just felt like you were, I mean, and in some cases you're taking a class to pass a class so you can eventually test to get your license, have letters behind your name, which then makes you qualified to do the work, right? And education is important. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair trying to, impart wisdom if that were not true. However, and I think back to what Joan said is we want to give something meaningful. I mean, all of what Joan's talked about and all of her anecdotes from her years of experience, it's stories that continue to resonate for you in terms of relaying what's important. So you're looking at something from 50 years ago, a story of a woman who was being told how her needs should be met, and how you now remember 50 years later the importance of that lesson that you're now sharing with our students today to carry forth as they move into the workforce, many of you are already in the workforce. But I think about learning from you, Joan, and the importance of storytelling and how you have taken those stories that you've not sat with them, you've told them. And by telling them, you create opportunity for meaningful change. And I remember in grad school, in this class that I took, thinking to myself, this is a bunch of hogwash. I'm never going to have any, I'm never going to be in a place where I could make any type of meaningful policy change. When really you can. And Joan led with those stories and created waves of change in our child welfare system for years to come. And so I think both of us feel strongly in that your stories matter. It's about, telling them and finding the right people to tell them to. Because,
And it's about how you matter and
yep,
your energy and activity in the area of child welfare
yep,
policy really
hmm
makes a difference. I mean, I was struck in the journaling discussions how many people resonated to the article about keeping race and address off of the
oh, the
referral.
census.
Really makes a difference in terms of
Oh, for the,
child,
blind removal meetings. Yeah.
right, and how much difference that makes, just those two little things.
hmm and those of you that are in that line of work right now, start telling the story.
Yeah.
I mean, someone, I think it was, forget, maybe it was Tamika who said she's heard this now from 3 or 5 different professors about blind removal meetings. Well, then we got to
That's-
start. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. So I wanted to end, Joan, with the quote that you told me about. I think it was an Indigenous woman from Australia,
Mhm.
because I think it really summarizes what we hope you all walk away from this class with, which is motivation to make change, an understanding of the ability that you already have to make change. And then just, you know, as Joan often talks about, is lighting a fire, and to be that light. So Joan, was it somebody you met in Australia, or is it just
No, it's just, it's a pretty commonly known
oh,
quote, I think,
there you go.
that was made some years ago.
Okay.
A missionary came to Australia, and the indigenous woman who met him said, "If you've come to save me, you can go home. But if you've come because your liberation is connected to mine, welcome." And that brings me back to we're all in this together,
Mhm.
which is, I think, has become a pretty common theme in this pandemic. We're all in this together. And it's true for social policy too.
Mhm.
We're all in this together. We all want what's better for kids and families because they're the fundamental unit in our culture, in our society. And we need families to be strong and participatory in, but they have to feel like they mean something, you know, that there's meaning for them and that people are listening.
Mhm.
That's up to all of us to make sure that that's happening.
Mhm. And as practitioners in the field, it's our ethical obligation to ensure that that's happening. And we have all the faith in the world that this group of students will do exactly that. And we are available always as you move through, you know, past graduation and into your careers. We're just an email or a text message, or you can call Joan. Just don't call me. You can text me. So we'll be in touch about class for next week with a little more detail around what we want you to talk about on the discussion thread. But for class this week, we'll post this Zoom session, and then again ask for reflections on the discussion thread. It's been really meaningful for us to be able to see, you know, what you are all thinking, feeling, and sharing that. That's been awesome. I actually read them. I know Joan does as well. So thank you for your continued engagement. It's this has been anything but normal and super strange for us to figure out on the fly. And you guys have been an amazing group of adapting along with us. And I hope you continue to ask for what you need in these last couple weeks of class. But just know we want you to be successful, and we'll make whatever we need to make happen in order to ensure that that's the case. So
Mary, you summed it up really well. The other thing I wanted to say is that I feel really badly that I haven't been able to interact face to face
mhm,
over a longer period of time with each of you. I really enjoyed the class time that we did have.
mhm,
I was inspired by you. I'm still inspired by your reading, or by your journaling, and by your papers. Look forward to your alternative idea.
mhm.
What else could be? I was telling Mary in the original syllabus, we were going to have each of you present what your
Oh, right.
proposal.
Policy alternatives.
Yeah, so that everybody could hear some of the creative thinking that people had. And now we don't have that same opportunity, but maybe on your discussion thread, you can throw in what you're thinking about for an alternative uh, policy proposal.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking we'll do for next week's class so that we can exchange ideas, even though we can't have group presentations. And I'm sure everybody's super sad they can't do their group presentation, because I know how much fun those were. Thanks for being with us. I have gotten a kick out of loading these clips onto YouTube, because it actually shows how many views are there. So like, I think you guys are legitimately watching this stuff, even if you're just like sliding through and catching highlights. Or Joan, we're developing a following in the YouTube community, which is entirely possible as well.
Yeah.
We have a career ahead of us.
So there you go again. We don't know what's in store.
We don't know what the future holds. So our sending love to all of you, and we'll be in touch. And we're grateful. I know I'm saying that, you know, for Joan, I know she feels the same way. So thanks for letting us be on this ride with y'all.
Thank you.